Today I want to talk to you about the fact that you get intrusive thoughts in your mind and it continues haunting you there and continues its presence, and how we can help the brain to find its default setting and function as it is designed to shut down the intrusive thoughts. In our discussion, we're specifically discussing pure O. In other words, a physical OCD has an obsession, and because of the obsession, you want to do a compulsion. And its compulsion includes a certain physical rituals that you can actually physically see you're doing a certain rituals as part of the compulsion for the obsession. Such as if you have obsession that your hands are dirty, the compulsion would be to wash your hands. So it has a ritual of physical nature, washing the hands. Or if you have a obsession of turning the light switch on and off certain number of times, otherwise something bad will happen or otherwise something good will not happen. Or if you want to leave your apartment or your home, you lock the door and you come back, you lock again because you're not sure, you want to make sure, so you lock it, or you come back and check. Or if you want to see if the stove is still on or not, you come back inside the apartment, check the stove and look again. And these are all obsessions that have a certain compulsion that includes and involves a physical ritual to be done in order to complete that compulsion. But the type of obsession and compulsion that we're talking about, it's different, which I will explain as we go on. But in pure O, which this phrase, pure O, is coined by Dr. Philipson, it represents the images, suggestions, narratives that are all mental. It's in here. So its compulsion of this obsession is also invisible. It's all happening here through thoughts and repetitive thoughts and debating thoughts and all the challenges of the physical OCD, its obsession and compulsion. It's happening internally, which its rituals are not including any physical compulsion. Any physical activity is not part of the ritual of the compulsion of the mental intrusive thoughts, the pure O. So we're discussing about that kind of a challenge from the brain, and we're trying to open up understanding of how we can help the brain to rewire itself from this annoying and irrelevant suggestions and activities of the brain. We will hopefully go into describing the mechanism of what's involved in dissipating or decimating the intrusive thoughts that are not in line with your values. And then we discuss about how we can actually help the brain to rewire itself, what kind of a behavior or interaction we need to have with the brain to help it, to teach it to get back to its regular function, which would be not to continue this looping intrusive thoughts, whatever thought it may be that is not in line with your values. So number one thing is to realize what is it and how is it that we don't have these intrusive thoughts presenting themselves throughout the day when we are not in the glitch of OCD. You see, the brain's job, like any other organs of our body, is something specific, like your kidneys filter your blood, your liver detoxifies and creates the enzyme that is needed for the well functioning of your body, and the rest of it. The brain's job is to make thoughts. Brain, unlike what most people think, is not intelligent. There is no intelligence center in the brain. As Dr. Speary and Dr. Penfield of Montreal in the 1930s and 1960s, I'm not sure which, they have operated on the brain maybe thousands of times, if not more. And as you know, when you break into the skull of the brain, there are no nerve endings to feel pain. So often the patients are awake during the operation in order to guide the surgeon if the surgeon is reaching its targets and it's being guided and getting data and information while it's doing its experiment. So in the many of the investigative operations that Dr. Speary and Dr. Penfield, and later on we may talk about, I have a video on Dr. Owens and Dr. Leibotz's experiments as well, but in many of the operations that these two neurosurgeons have done, they have never been able to localize intelligence center. They could localize sight center, occipital point, they stimulate something and the patient sees certain kind of a light, and they could localize sight center, or the speech center that would stimulate part of the brain, and the patient would make some sound through using his tongue, and that represents a location for a speech center or motoring center. They could help or stimulate part of the brain, and a limb would move, or the patient would raise his or her hand. But they could never localize math center. They could never localize compassionate center. They could never localize consciousness center. They could never, therefore, localize intelligence center, because the brain is not intelligent. The brain is just an organ, just like any other organ, and it has a specific job. The brain's job is to make thoughts. During the day, it makes 80, 90,000 thoughts a day, and most of them you don't even recognize, because there's a mechanism in midbrain basal ganglia. It's called striatum, and in the striatum, right above other things that are present there, such as goal finding center, reward center, and habit center, there's also a lever called caudate nucleus. Its job is to automatically decimate or dissipate, delete an intrusive thoughts. A thought, a suggestion, an image that is not in line with your values. That's what its job is. So when you see intrusive thoughts lingering there and not moving away as it's supposed to, it's because caudate nucleus is malfunctioning. It's not doing its job. It's not because you're changing in your inclination or your interest or your sexual orientation. It's because what is designed to move the intrusive thoughts to the bin to be deleted is not doing its job as it's originally designed to do. So in that case, you need to help the caudate nucleus, in fact, therefore help the brain to rewire itself to the default setting and starts functioning as it was designed to function, to decimate or dissipate the intrusive thoughts that are not in line with your values, you don't agree with them, they're not of your interest, and that would be an automatic job. But when it actually is not working, that mechanism to shut down the intrusive thoughts hover. They don't disappear. And because they don't disappear, you figure, well, because it's in the screen of my head and it's not disappearing, it must mean something. But it doesn't mean anything. It just means the brain is in that particular department is in a malfunctioning mode. And you need to help the brain to regain its default setting, to be retrained to do what it's designed to do, and then therefore you go on with your life. For that, we need to discuss certain principles for you to understand what is it that helps the brain to stop thinking, stop the function. Because when it doesn't dissipate or delete the suggestion, image, or a intrusive thought that appears, because we just talked about malfunction of the caudate nucleus lever, so to speak, when it hovers, prefrontal cortex gives it a narrative, because there is a emotional danger signal is coming up with that makes you uncomfortable, because that's the job of amygdala, to send emotional danger signal when something is not in line with your values, whether it's a real actual danger out there like a ferocious animal about to attack you or a truck about to hit you, or it's a certain suggestion that is not in line with your values and gives you anxiety, and so to speak. It's supposed to alarm you so you will do something about it to protect yourself. But when there is a malfunction in overactive amygdala as well that sends the emotional danger signals when they don't exist, or it's not necessary for such emotional danger signal to be sent, and when caudate nucleus doesn't do its job, if it's related to a narrative that is not in line with your values, then the prefrontal cortex gives it a narrative, because it says, well, there's a danger signal coming and there is no relevant to it, but because it's there, I got to give it something to make this person identify that this is some kind of a alarm or alert to protect itself. So what is it that makes this person really move to protect itself? What is it that this person dislikes the most, or it's in disagreement, it's not in line with its values? Obviously, it goes to the sexual realm, the sexual connotations, and then it gives it a certain value in order to make the amygdala's job meaningful and for you to protect yourself. They're all hoping to protect yourself from what it is that your preference is, but they just are malfunctioning and they don't know how to do it. They overdo it, and now you got to help the brain to regain its balance and to function as it was designed to function. For that reason, we need to discuss what is thinking and how thinking can stop. For that, I need to sidestep and go and explain something that we will share together. So hold on to this part. We'll come back to it to connect with it. So let's discuss what is thinking. If somebody asks you, let's say ask me, what's your name? I say Mehran. In my case, my name is Mehran. So this is not thinking. It's an available, instinctive information, and I can simply access it and then come up with the answer. What's your name? Mehran. Where are you from? Vancouver. These are available information that there's no process of figuring out necessary, because thinking starts when there's a question posed to you, and from the time that the question is posed to you to the time that you will find and figure out the response, the answer to that question, that duration is called thinking. For example, if someone asks me, let's say you're a pilot and there is a twin-engine plane, each engine has so many thousand horsepower, and then there's 128 passenger seats available, and 90% of them have shown up. They bought ticket, they're sitting in their seats, and then there is so many miles or kilometers between where the plane is parked and its destination, and there's so much fuel in this aircraft. Total weight of the aircraft is this much. So calculate how long it takes for this aircraft to be piloted from here to Japan. Now, with all this information and data, to figure out the answer of how long it takes to fly to Japan, this needs a certain time of configuration. The time that it takes to do the configuration, that figuring out period, that is called thinking. Now, this thinking that is trying to calculate the answer, because there is a proposed question to the brain, and its job is to calculate these things, to facilitate figuring out things. While it's figuring it out, it's looking for the answer. And the way to stop this process of figuring out thinking is to find the answer. One way is it calculates, comes up to an answer, puts a formula together, says, okay, it's 22 hours. So it says 22 hours. Thinking stops, because you got the answer. The other way to stop thinking is when you calculate, or the brain goes through the figuring out period and figuring out process and cannot figure out how to do this, how to use the formula, cannot figure out how long it takes to get to Japan with these credentials of this aircraft, and says, I don't know, because you couldn't figure it out. At that point, again, having tried to figure out, couldn't get the answer, and says, I don't know, thinking stops. And the other way for it is when the question is posed and the brain or the person, you say, I don't know and I don't want to know. So you don't give, you veto the question. So in all three cases, the brain has received a conclusion. Because for the brain to stop functioning or to stop its activity to figure out something, it either needs to figure that thing out, a conclusion, or get a mandate that it tried and it couldn't, that's its conclusion, I don't know. Or it just doesn't start configuring because it's been giving a mandate conclusion that I don't know and I don't want to know. I don't know and I don't want to figure out or configure or think about or calculate. So the brain stops thinking when it gets a conclusion. So in trying to help the brain to rewire itself, in fact, you're trying to suggest a conclusion, offer a conclusion to the brain, so the brain is satisfied and recalls it's to do something. That is a conclusion, because either it goes to them to find it or it is recalled from that duty. So for example, because the brain is looking to win or to represent itself as an entity that is under the illusion that it is intelligent. The brain wants to be you, so it tries to represent itself as someone equal to you or something equal to you. So therefore it wants to pretend that it's logical, or it can accomplish a task in the form of whatever it is that it's suggesting should value. In order to prove it to itself that it's valued, it needs to be accepted. It needs to get a conclusion which represents acceptance to the brain. Via acceptance, the brain feels conclusion to its effort to present itself as a viable and valuable part of you. That acceptance, which all of us in the world want to have certain kind of feeling of acceptance, the brain also wants the acceptance and it wants it from you. If it can't get it, it continues that function and that figuring out to try to prove what it's suggesting has any kind of a merit. And because the brain is not intelligent, because they've never been able to localize intelligence center in the brain, hence brain is not intelligent, is not smart, it's just an organ, does a certain function. Because it doesn't have the smarts, it needs to somehow be given that token of acceptance by agreement. Look, in life, anything that you're agreeing with, anything that you agree with is not in your thoughts. You're not thinking about it. For example, you get up and you like to have tea or coffee, so you'll have it. So all day long, you're not thinking about, do I like coffee or do I not like it? Do I like tea or do I not? Do I drink tea or do I? None of that, because you agree to it. Or the shirt that you're wearing, the color, you're not thinking about, should I wear this color or that color? Or do I like the color that I wear now? You're in agreement. You've done something that you're in agreement with. Everything that you do in life, that you agree with it, you certainly don't have that in your thoughts. You're not thinking about it. Most of your thoughts, if not all, are things that you don't agree with. The things that you don't agree with is constantly you're debating on it, trying to figure out how to clear things out and make your brain free. But you think by more thinking about it, you make your brain free. In fact, by giving a conclusion to your brain, you can stop thinking. In order to stop the function of the making thoughts in the brain, you need to take mandates from the brain to think about anything. Either you take thoughts out of the brain, in other words, you come outside of the brain by a function that it doesn't need calculation, such as meditation and so on, that you're taking thoughts out of the brain and the brain is not involved in thinking, it's just involved in some simple thing that its total attention and focus is easily there. Therefore, all the functions of thinking, creating thoughts goes out the window. It's not necessary. And that way, thoughts stop. And because you're giving a mandate to the brain to do something that is so simple, but it takes all its attention and it likes to because it's so simple. So thinking stops. Or you simply give a conclusion to the brain so brain doesn't think that it needs to debate on these and prove to you that there is any logic here, because the brain cannot understand any logic, cannot understand that you don't prefer something, you don't agree with something, it's not in your values. It doesn't understand these things. Brain simply makes thoughts based on all the things that has been out there in the real world, and somehow through mediums or activities of people or real life things that is seen in the movies or whatever, out from inclinations, sexual orientation, from different activities there, different restaurants and different foods or different colors or different books. It has received all that information and makes thoughts based on all these information. But it really doesn't understand why it makes these thoughts unless it's a particular mandate you, the boss of the brain, give the brain to bring that to fruition in the way you describe. Otherwise, the brain, it just makes thoughts out of whatever it's been, the data and information has come to be available to its attention. So once you have created this condition of giving the brain a conclusion, the brain stops insisting on engaging you with suggestion of intrusive thoughts, so on. That's why ERP, exposure response prevention therapy, or CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, these are gold standards of OCD and OCD subset and HOCD whatnot, because they work. Now, why do they work? Because in ERP, you're actually giving conclusion to the brain's uttering or question or its suggestions. So, for example, if you're heterosexual, the suggestion of the brain that you're not heterosexual, you're homosexual. Or if you're homosexual, and suggestion of the brain to you that you're heterosexual, not homosexual. These are all things that obviously it makes you rise against a suggestion that is not in line with your values and you're not in agreement with it. And you debate with the brain, trying to prove to the brain that the brain is wrong. And instead of moving about your business and your life, you're paying attention to a apparatus, to an organ of yours, trying to prove to an organ that its opinion about you matters and it can define your gender or your orientation or whatever it is that you prefer. That's why you go after it. And that is the worst thing you're going to do, because the brain is not looking for logic to be convinced, is looking to prove to you that it is equal valuable to you, so it wants to prove its presence by having you accept what it says and give it a conclusion. That's why in ERP, when let's choose one example, you're heterosexual and brain suggests you're not heterosexual, you're gay, debating with it, trying to prove to it, it doesn't give it the conclusion, and this debate continues, and these intrusive thoughts continue being in your head, creating all those standard characteristics of OCD, which is doubting. And you want to do compulsion, you want to do tests and exams to prove to yourself, and all these just around and round running after nothing. So what you need to do is to tell the brain when it tells you you're gay, say, yeah, you're right, I'm gay. It's not about accepting that you're gay, because if you were gay, you wouldn't have any objection to it. And you would simply understand that in this world, everything exists. So when you agree with the brain, it's not that you agree with what the brain suggests about you. You agree that the brain can say whatever it wants to say, that the brain has the right to express itself the way its opinion is. Instead of thinking that the brain's opinion or uttering is a representation of who you are or your identity, you deal with the brain as you deal with someone who has a psychological problem or is crazy and keeps saying things that is irrelevant to you. So in order to put an end to that discussion, you just say, yeah, okay, you're right. But it doesn't mean that you actually believe that person is right. It's just that you give it that point and that credit in order to end the conversation, because you're busy, you want to go about your life, and you don't want to spend your time proving to someone who's not logical something that is obvious to you. But now you have to prove to someone who simply doesn't have the capability to understand, like the brain in this case. So when the brain says you're gay, say, yeah, I'm gay. Brain says, oh, look, that guy is, good looking, you like him. Say, oh yeah, I like it, just anything else. It suggests you up it and say, yeah, you're right. So in other words, what you're agreeing with, it's not whether or not the content of the suggestion of the brain is correct, that you're gay or not gay. That's not what you're agreeing with. You're agreeing with the fact that such a thought that the brain has suggested can exist, and it is but a thought. And no need for assurance seeking or asking everybody else's opinion or going through a compulsion because you need assurance for the suggestion that is not in line with your values. So what you're accepting is not accepting the content of the suggestion of the brain, it's accepting that such thought can exist. I accept that such thought can exist, and it is a thought. All thoughts can exist. Pretty much what we talked about it before. In that way, after a while, the brain learns that there's no fear, there's an acceptance of this thought to be as what it is, and there is no need for it to constantly remind you or bring it to your attention and continue this on, and eventually it subsides and the brain learns that there is no resistance here, there is no energy to be sought after, and if there is no energy to be gained here, it's not going to forward such opportunity when it can't gain anything or feel satisfied to create certain kind of a occupation. As you know, the brain finds security in occupation. Its way of finding security is different than finding security as our physical portion of the body seeks security. We seek security psychologically and physically. But for example, if you're sitting in your apartment, the door is locked, you're in a good part of town, in the physically safe environment, your body, your physical portion of your existence finds security. But the brain doesn't find security in the same way that the body finds security. Like if it's a safe physical environment, body finds security in that, but the brain still doesn't find security. The brain finds security in the order of things. The brain finds security in occupation, in being busy. It doesn't have a place in the body until it learns and you teach it that it can have a place in the body. But until then, that's another story for another time. The brain needs to be busy, and in the busyness, in the occupation, in creating dialogue, in creating energy exchange and interchange between you, the awareness, and itself, it finds occupation, it gets occupied, and in occupation, it finds a home. to feed, there is a virtual existence of a place for it because it doesn't have an actual physical place to hang his hat. So he's looking for a virtual place which is created by occupation, being involved in certain kind of a dialogue or interaction of energy back and forth, which then it finds itself as it has found a physical space for it to call, here I am, I exist, in the place it finds. And in the place it finds, it's occupation. How can it create occupation? By creating contradiction for you to go back and forth. When you take that away from it, it no longer has any excuse to continue because it feels there's no exchange coming, I can't gain anything, and there's no need because there's no resistance. He or she accepted that such thought as I'm suggesting can exist. What more can I ask? I've got agreement. Yay! So it just shuts up. I'd like to agree with anybody who's talking something that you're not interested in, but you agree with them to finish it and go on about your day to bigger and better things. Then the brain says there's no reason to debate it. There's an agreement here. And like anything else in life that you agree with, the thought stops because there's no reason for it to continue, and it's not going to be in your mind because there's nothing to solve there. The conclusion has been given. So when the brain says you're gay, it says, yeah, I'm gay. Yeah, you're right. Fair enough. And anything else says just write on it. Say, yeah, I accept the fact that you can say whatever you want to say, and that's a possibility. It doesn't mean that you agree with what the brain is suggesting about you. You're just trying to be kind to the brain and treat it as a crazy person and say, yeah, you're right. And this you are right reflects on the brain that, oh, I won. I was right. So there's no reason for me to continue. That's pretty much the whole logic of this acceptance. And when you hear about this accepting, it's not that you accept that you're not what you are. It's not about accepting that, all your life you're heterosexual, you want to be heterosexual, you prefer to be heterosexual, that is what you identify with. Now suddenly because the brain says you're supposed to accept that the brain is right, you're not. The brain is an apparatus, it's an organ, that is stupid, it has no intelligence. So obviously you can't accept the brain, you just want to help it to become balanced and stop making these irrelevant suggestions. And the way to do it, by entertaining it, helping the brain to calm down. How you calm down? By give it a conclusion. So what it says, yeah, you're right, yeah, possibly. Oh, that guy's good. Yeah, it's very good looking actually. Yeah, and a nice kiss I would like to offer. Anything that the brain says, oh, well, there's no debate here. This guy is not resisting, so there's no reason, there's no exchange of energy for me to continue. In other words, you're taking the fear out of the suggestion or out of something that you find it not in line with your values. It is the fear, the energy of the fear, that feeds that what causes you trouble. When there is no energy to feed the uttering or the suggestion of the brain, when you have no fear of what energy that suggestion could transfer to you, you have no problem having these repetitive into your mind about inclination or about whatever it is that the brain is suggesting. Of course, there are a lot more involved in ERP, and you got to ask your psychologist who specializing in OCD and OCD subset. As you know, not every psychologist knows about how to treat or do ERP. They have to be specialized in OCD and OCD subsets. Just like many other professions, their speciality and focus of study on a certain topic, certain tangent, certain fragment of that study. So you got to find a psychologist who is expert in that field to guide you in the things that needs to be involved in an ERP and properly coach you to be able to do it and successfully enjoy the outcome, enjoy the results of it. So this is how you can actually get the brain to rewire itself. And of course, using Dr. Schwartz's 4-step for the standard OCD and intrusive thoughts, relabel, reframe, refocus, and revalue, which happens automatically on the brain. All the 4 steps eventually take place just like this, when you exercise it and practice it, then these combinations are how you can rewire the brain and rid yourself from debating with an apparatus, with an organ, instead of thinking that the identity or what the brain suggests is what you're supposed to actually thinking it has merits or credibility that you're changing in any shape or form. In this way, you're helping your brain to get back to the default setting and do its job right, and eventually coded nucleus gets back to its natural setting and works as it's designed to do. So hope that will help you to understand what OCD and HOCD operates and move on to bigger and better things and create that tranquility and balance back to your life and attend to your business and enjoy your life. I'll talk to you soon.